Hey folks, how's it going? Rum Gaming here, back into the video. Today's episode, we're going to be taking a look at Vengeance Demon Hunter. This is going to be a Season 4 guide geared towards Mythic Plus. Alright, first pro on our list is great with initial aggro. This is really important in a Mythic Plus setting, right? Let's say you're running with something like a Marksmanship Hunter. You're going to make sure that the Marksmanship Hunter isn't pulling threat with their high burst damage. Vengeance Demon Hunter seems to just have a high bursty damage profile themselves, so they're able to get that initial aggro quickly. So this is going to be the first pro on the list. We also have low cooldowns, so this could be viewed as a pro or con, just kind of depending on how you look at it. So it does give you more control, but at the same time, it's going to require more management. It's going to require more things to juggle. So Vengeance Demon Hunter isn't really a tank that's just passively tanky. You have a lot of things kind of happening at once. To me, that makes them fun to play. To some people, it might not, but you know, that's just something to kind of keep in mind going forward, that there is a lot of buttons to press. There is a lot of things that you need to keep track of compared to some of the other tanks. We also have top tier damage right now, both in single target and area of effect. Just in terms of tanks, right? So outside of survivability, raw damage is going to be king in any sort of group. So this is just a great bonus to have. And this does kind of pair up with our first point, great with initial aggro. The more damage you have, the more threat you're going to have. We also have a really strong healing and mitigation. We have really good mobility. You know, mobility is just one of those bonuses. I do think mobility is very important on a tank, right? You always want to be, as the tank, a couple seconds ahead of your party. That way you can just pick up the mobs, start building threat, and just get everything grouped and situated before everybody else gets there. That way they can just immediately go into their damage rotation, not have to worry about anything, and just start pumping. Tanks are also the leader of the group, right, in a dungeon. So the faster your leader is, typically the faster you're going to get through the dungeon. Then probably one of the biggest items on the list here is going to be the magic debuff that you bring. So this is brought through something called Chaos Brand. So when we damage a target, they're going to be taking 5% increased magic damage. So considering that spell cleave comps are the meta right now, Vengeance Demon Hunter just fits into the meta perfectly. So 5% might not sound like a lot, but over the course of an entire dungeon, over the course of, you know, your group that you run with, gearing up, getting better geared, doing more damage, that 5% is going to scale exponentially. So this debuff right here is worth millions and millions of damage towards the end of a run, especially in higher keys. So very important aspect of Demon Hunter. So if you're new to Demon Hunter, just know that you do bring that debuff and you will pair better with spellcasters. Now, before we get into the cons here, I just wanted to say overall, right now, at the time of recording this video, Vengeance Demon Hunter is just in a class of its own right now. It's 1 or 2 tier list above any other tank right now, and they're just insanely good at the moment. And for cons, nothing too major here really. Kind of like we already talked about, you have to juggle a lot of spells. You have a lot of things that are on low cooldown, so this can be a pro or a con depending on how you look at it. Then down here at the very bottom, they're very punishing if misplayed. So most of their mitigation is going to come through abilities, right? Through healing yourself. So your health pool is going to be a little bit spiky. And if something is down, if you don't have an active mitigation up, you're going to really feel it on this tank compared to a lot of the other tanks. So nothing too major here in the cons, but these are just a couple things to kind of note. Okay, then the overview of Vengeance Demon Hunter here. So we do a ton of healing through something called soul fragments. So if you look at the very bottom here, consuming a lesser soul fragment heals you for 6% of all damage taken in the last 5 seconds, healing you for a minimum 1% of your maximum health. So we will talk about that a little bit later in the guide, kind of which abilities synergize with soul fragments, but just know it is a resource. You're going to use them. They're going to heal you through abilities. Now we do also work on a fury based system. And the fury is important, but it's not as important as the soul fragments that we just talked about. But if you're familiar with like how a warrior works with their rage based system, it's kind of similar with fury. You build it up, you spend your fury on other abilities. Then of course we have sigils. So sigils are area of effect spells that you can place on the ground like a magical symbol, and they're going to trigger various effects. So whether that's mitigation, damage, or mob control, it is going to be a key component of playing Vengeance. So our main sigil is actually going to be Sigil of Flame down here in the bottom right, and it's going to synergize extremely well with our tier set, which we will talk about here very shortly. And this will also generate us 30 Fury. Then in 10.2, we did have a major overhaul to a lot of our abilities, and these updates led to substantial increases in both single target and AoE damage. And we also got a pretty big bump to survivability in AoE scenarios. So Vengeance Demon Hunter is sitting in a really good spot right now after this rework. Okay, now let's go ahead and talk about our tier sets. So let's talk about the 2 set first. So Fiery Resolve, when you attack a target afflicted by Sigil of Flame, your damage and healing are increased by 2%, and your stamina is increased by 2% for 8 seconds, stacking up to 5. So going back to Sigil of Flame here, this is why Sigil of Flame is so important to us, is first in the 2 set, and we also have it coming into play into the 4 set. So this will be very easy to stack, and you can see right here, all the bonuses that we're getting just from Sigil of Flame, right? We're getting increased damage, increased healing, and increased stamina, stacking up to 5 for a 10% on all of them. So again, Sigil of Flame is just going to be very core to our rotation. Very easy to play around, which is something that I like. Sometimes you get into some of these set bonuses on specific specs, and they're just really clunky, hard to play around, but it feels really good for Vengeance. Down here at the very bottom, we have our 4 set. So Sigil of Flame's periodic damage has a chance to flare up, shattering an additional soul fragment from a target and dealing X amount of attack power as additional damage. Each 40 Fury you spend reduces its cooldown by 1 second. So we got pretty nice built-in CDR for Sigil of Flame, so this is really nice. You can have it up pretty much at all times in between packs. Considering how core this is to our rotation, you know, we want to have this up as much as possible. And then this is also really nice, right? We get soul fragments we have a chance to get a soul fragment for each mob that is afflicted by our Sigil of Flame. So essentially, the more mobs you pull, the tankier you get, which is really good when you get into something like, let's just say, for example, a Tyrannical week, where the trash already doesn't hit super hard. You're able to pull really big packs as Vengeance because each individual mob isn't necessarily hitting as hard as they do on Fortified weeks. So really neat tier set, really easy to play around, and it's very powerful. All right, moving into stats here. Obviously, item level is going to be the most important, right? This is going to give us, it depends on the piece of gear, but for the most part, it's going to give you your primary stat. It's also going to give you more stamina. So in terms of raw damage, typically speaking, eye level is going to be king. Quick disclaimer here, always sim your character. None of this really matters. The sim is always going to be correct, but this is generally the stats you want to lean into. So going over critical strike real quick, this is just going to increase your chance to crit, which basically means it's going to either do double damage or double healing when that crit occurs. So critical strike for us is also converted into parry rating, and this is going to increase our chance to avoid melee hits. So critical strike is very important. We also have haste here. So haste is going to increase the proc rate on pretty much everything in the game. It also does reduce the cooldown on certain spells like Immolation Aura. I believe it affects the recharge rate of Fracture and Demon Spikes as well. And it will also reduce our global cooldown. So a very important stat here. You know, the more spells that you can cast in a shorter period of time is just good in general. So haste is going to scale very well for us. We also have versatility. So versatility is going to reduce damage taken, increase healing done, and increase our damage done. Pretty good general stat. It works against all forms of damage in the game. So it's just very effective, good general purpose stat. Then finally down here, we have our mastery. So this is going to increase our attack power, and this is also going to convert our agility into armor during our demon spikes. So half of that agility is actually converted at all times, and the other half is only converted when demon spikes is active. So it's not very strong, right? Because not all of our agility is always being converted into armor. It's this sort of half and half thing going on. If you can get more uptime on demon spikes, this does increase in value a little bit, but for the most part, demon spikes isn't up all the time. Therefore, mastery is just not a super important stat for us. Okay, then for cooldowns here, one thing to note is that our burst damage primarily comes from frailty down here in the bottom right. So this is something that we are going to want to track, And you want to make sure before you use any hard hitting abilities, right, you have a decent amount of frailty stacks. So typically speaking, right, just as a general rule of thumb, you want to try to have at least 3 frailty stacks on your target before you're using any of these abilities here. Now I say any of these abilities here, you know, not something like demon spikes here at the bottom, but anything that is damage, right? Because at the bottom of frailty, you can see you heal for 10% of all the damage you deal to targets. So when you're using your hard hitting damaging abilities, you're gonna be able to heal for as much as you can. So the more stacks of frailty you have and the harder hitting of an ability you have, the more you're going to heal for. Let's talk about the hunt really quick. So 1.5 minute cooldown, vengeance, charge your target, striking them for X amount of attack power, rooting them in place, inflicting damage over 6 seconds up to 5 enemies in your path. The pursuit invigorates your soul, healing you for 25% of the damage you deal to your hunt target for 20 seconds. So you can see how something like this is going to pair very well with our frailty, right? It does a lot of damage. It does a lot of healing already by default. And when you pair that with frailty, you get this huge 1.5 minute cooldown sort of heal. So I'm not going to talk about frailty anymore on this slide, but just know, you know, again, these hard hitting abilities pair frailty with them. We have Fell Devastation here, 40-second cooldown. It costs 50 Fury. So unleash the Fell within you, damaging enemies directly in front of you as fire damage over 2 seconds. So you generally want to be using this on cooldown. It is a channel 2-second cast here. Up next, we have Fiery Brand. So if you do have Fiery Demise and the Down in Flames talents, you'll want to sync this with 1 cast of your Fiery Brand. Now, this will also proc your Metamorphosis here in the bottom left. So you may want to hold it defensively, you know, for 5 to 10 seconds going into a pool just to make sure, you know, if any sort of spiky damage comes out, you're going to be able to counter that with your Metamorphosis. Now, this is on a 1 minute recharge, but it does go down to 45 seconds if you're running Down in Flames. And also Down in Flames will also give this a second charge. So you can kind of use this pretty freely, but you always want to make sure you have at least 1 charge, in my opinion, to use it defensively. Okay, we also have Soul Carver up here in the top left. Basically, all this says do some damage, do fire damage over 3 seconds. This will immediately shatter 3 lesser soul fragments from the target and 1 additional lesser soul fragment every 1 second. So this is a 1 minute cooldown. It's very strong. This is another ability that we can sync up with Fiery Brand if we want to. And again, this is something that we do want to use with high stacks of frailty down here. We have Elysian Decree down here in the bottom right. So place a demonic sigil at the target location that activates after 2 seconds. This will detonate, dealing damage, and will shatter up to 3 lesser soul fragments from enemies affected by this sigil. So this will do a decent amount of damage, do a lot of healing. Just know at the very bottom, it does deal reduced damage beyond 5 targets. So a lot of these have a pretty similar theme, right? Do damage, get soul fragments, and then you can heal. So that's kind of the general theme of Vengeance Demon Hunter, right? And then down here in the bottom left, we have Metamorphosis. It's going to be a strong defensive cooldown. You do want to try to use this on cooldown if you can. There is a cap on the duration of Metamorphosis. So if you do get a proc, for example, of Metamorphosis from another ability, you want to make sure that you're not casting Metamorphosis again until there's less than 5 seconds remaining on the duration, because the duration, again, it has a cap and you can't go over that cap. And I do believe that cap is at 20 seconds. And we didn't read it out here, but just to read it out, transform into a demon, increasing your current max health by 50% and armor by 200%. And down here at the very bottom, we do have Demon Spikes, Surge of Fell Power, increasing your armor by X amount of whatever your agility is. Then you can see if we do have the Deflecting Spikes talent, your parry chance will be increased by 15% for 6 seconds. So typically, you know, use this at the start of trash pools. That's when a trash pool is the most dangerous. It's probably within the first 10 seconds of the trash pool. So decent ability to have there. Okay, so this is going to be just sort of our general Mythic Plus priority here. Again, it's a general priority list. I'll never give out a hard rotation. Rotations change constantly, right? Depending on your unique situation in a dungeon at any given time. So on the right hand side of the screen here, we do have a few things we haven't talked about quite yet. We got Spirit Bomb here. We have Soul Cleave, Fellblade, Immolation R, Fracture, and Infernal Strike. So a lot of these are going to be Fury generators, and they will be used at a lower priority than things like your Sigil of Flame or something like your Spirit Bomb. So just go ahead and read Spirit Bomb out here. Costs 40 Fury, it consumes up to 5 available soul fragments, then explode, damaging nearby enemies for X amount of attack power per fragment consumed, and afflicting them with frailty for 6 seconds, causing you to heal for 10% of the damage that you deal to them. To them, deals reduced damage beyond 8 targets. So this does actually apply frailty like we just talked about in the previous slide. So that's really nice, but it does, the main point of Spirit Bomb is it consumes the soul fragments that we're generating. So this is one thing we've not talked about yet. You know, most of this guide, we talked about generating soul fragments. Well, how do you consume them to heal yourself? That's going to be through Spirit Bomb. We also have Soul Cleave, which is going to kind of work as our Fury dump after our Spirit Bomb. So visually strike up to 5 enemies in front of you, dealing X amount of attack power, and then you will heal yourself for 50% of that attack power. This can also consume soul fragments as well, and it will heal you for those soul fragments consumed. So you can run in at the start of a pull, Spirit Bomb, get frailty on everything, and then start soul cleaving to utilize those frailty stacks for additional healing through your soul cleave. We also have Fell Blade here, so charge your target and deal X amount of attack power as fire damage. So very low priority. You can see it's number 12 on our list, but you can use it as a form of mobility. Our main mobility, though, is going to come from Infernal Strike here. You will actually get 2 charges of this through talents. My opinion is to use it as your, again, your main mobility source, and you always want to have 1 charge of it available to you. So try to keep this on cooldown constantly, have a charge always recharging, but you also want a charge always available to you. We also have Fracture here, so this is going to help us generate a few more soul fragments. It's also going to generate Fury for us as well. You do get 2 charges of this on a 4.5 second recharge. So this is going to be another item that's kind of low on the priority list, but it is nice to have. It feels good as a filler. I mean, it's hard to complain too much about generating soul fragments, generating Fury, and doing damage. And then we also have Immolation Aura on a 30-second recharge. For Vengeance down here, engulf yourself in flames, radiating X amount of attack power as fire damage over 6 seconds. It also generates 20 Fury. So getting over to the priority list here. Number 1 on the list is Spirit Bomb. And the interesting part about this is it costs 40 Fury. Well, if you go into a pool, right off the bat, you don't have any Fury. So how do you get to this 40 Fury? So typically what you want to do, you can kind of see at the bottom left here, you want to pull your Fury or build up your Fury from the previous pool. That way you can go into the next pool with a Spirit Bomb ready to go. So down here in the bottom left is just kind of a general idea of what you want to be doing, right? You want to be pulling up your Fury, you want to apply Frailty, you want to dump your Fury, and then you want to use your cooldowns with your Frailty stacks. So just reading through the list here, you want to Spirit Bomb off the bat, you want to Infernal Strike, right? You want to get 1 of those charges ticking immediately. You want to Fiery Brand and Sigil of Flame. So your Fiery Brand is going to buff your Sigil of Flame damage, increasing its effectiveness. From here, you want to Fell Devastation, and these are basically your cooldowns, right? Fell Devastation, The Hunt, Elysian Decree. You want to Spirit Bomb with at least 4 soul fragments, or at least 3 in Metamorphosis, right? Depending on which form you're in. You want to spend additional Fury with your Soul Cleave, and then from here, you can just kind of weave in your filler abilities. All right, guys, that's going to be it for this video. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. We'll see you on the next one.